So tonight we are going to be taking a look at Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 24. And tonight we're going to be talking about devoted to what? And so you can kind of think of just simply the title of the lesson. We're going to be talking about our devotion to God. And talking about our devotion to God, how much of the time are we devoted to God? You know, sometimes we can say, well, you know what, I give God a lot of my time, or, you know, we say we give God some of our time, but do we really give God the time that He really deserves? And I'll be honest with you, I don't give God the time that He deserves. You know, He deserves every single second of the day. You know, and I, at least not right now. One day when I go to be with the Lord in heaven, I'll be able to do that. But for, you know, right now, you know, it seems like, for me anyway, it is kind of a battle. And that is that I think, okay, I needed to be devoted to God, and I try to be devoted to God. But it seems like there are some things that oftentimes get in the way, and there's sometimes things that just seem to pull me away. And there can be a lot of different things to pull us away, but one thing that we're going to be talking about tonight is just simply materialism. And I know we'd say, okay, materialism, bad, but I think that we need to understand that materialism can be a kind of deceptively powerful way to pull us away from God, and so we need to kind of take aware of that. Now, in this scripture that we are going to be looking at tonight, chapter 6, verses 19 through 24. Jesus said this. He said, "Do not store up yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal, but store up yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in or steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. So then, if your eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. So, if the light that is in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth, or you cannot serve God and mammon." Now, in this passage of Scripture, what we're going to see is Jesus used three different contrasts to illustrate this idea about how we need to be completely devoted to God from our hearts, not just simply on the external side of things. And at the same time, what we're going to see is that materialism is just going to run all the way through. The first thing that we notice, the first illustration, is right here in verses. Boy, that's an ugly looking bracket, isn't it? I just need to redraw that because that just looked like Simon's scribble. That's a little better. Okay, so verse 19 through 21, there's the first illustration in contrast about having our treasures laid up for us in heaven instead of on earth. The second is right here about what influences our lives, and that is it going to be light? Is it going to be darkness? And then that right here is the two masters of what we're going to be devoted to. Okay? All right, so let's take a look at the very first question. And the very first question says in verses 19 and 20, there is a contrast of two treasures. What are the two treasures that Jesus spoke of? Discuss the contrast of the two. Okay? So, first thing is verse 19 through 21. Illustration of the contrast of two treasures. What are the two treasures? Okay, or we could just say treasures on earth. Okay, so treasures on earth, what is that going to be contrasted with?
Treasures in heaven.
Treasures in heaven, okay. So we've got treasures in earth, and then we've got treasures in heaven, all right. So How are these two things contrasted? When we look at this, what are some contrasts that we see here?
Well, we like the treasure here on earth, the thief and steel breaking steel and rust and corrupt.
There we go. And so we see that it says moss and rust destroy or corrupt. All right. And then we also see that thieves are going to break in and steal. If you look at another translation, it'll say dig through and steal. And the idea is that, homes in that day and time, especially if they were made out of mud bricks, thieves literally would, break through the wall or dig through the wall in order to get into the house to rob it. And so, there's that idea. Okay, so where we've got treasures on earth, where we've got the moth and the rust destroying and the thieves breaking in and stealing, what is the contrast to that as far as the treasures in heaven?
Permanent versus temporary?
Permanent versus temporary. Or, if we just look at it, it says moth and rust does not destroy. Thieves do not break in and steal. And so, it's permanent versus temporary. And so if you think about it like, where you've got something that is material on this earth, a moth could eat it, rust could corrode it, or any kind of corrosion could happen. But what about our treasures in heaven? They're not going anywhere, right? Have you ever had some kind of neat little thing here on this earth, and even if you put it in a box or something, and you came back years later and found it, is it the same as when you first bought it? Generally speaking, not. It can fade, it can rust, it can corrode, it can whatever. Even if those things don't happen, does it still have the same draw and allure as when you first had it? Probably not. Fads change and everything like that. But what about our treasures that we have in heaven? Have you stopped to think about the treasures that we're going to have in heaven are going to have the same effect to our lives, the same impact of what they are? They're going to have the same impact on day 1 million than on day number 1, or day 1 trillion as on day number 1. It's the heavenly rewards that we have, they are going to have the same impact to our lives, that right then when we first get it. That's kind of cool if you stop and think about it. Peter described it as a flower that does not fade away. It doesn't miss any of those allurements. Now, here we've got this idea about thieves breaking in and stealing, right? And so, anything that we have on this earth, as far as a tangible thing, can be taken, okay? But if you think about our treasures in heaven, are our treasures in heaven ever going to go anywhere? Nope, they're not. As a matter of fact, First Peter talked about that our inheritance, which some of this is wrapped up in, is protected by the power of God. And so, the things that, this involves our salvation with our inheritance, but it also involves our eternal rewards. Those things are protected by the power of God. And is there any greater power out there? There's none. And so, even though somebody could go in and take something from us here on this earth, nobody's going to be able to take anything from us in heaven. Isn't that going to be nice? Don't have to worry about locking your doors, ever. Don't have to worry about leaving it anywhere, right? Okay, on to the next question. Why is it foolish to store up treasures on earth in verse number 19? And how can we apply this in today's terms? Oh, I guess we just talked about that, didn't we? because it will break through and steal and everything like that. And so, if you think about, our treasures and storing up treasures on this earth, it is kind of foolish because there is a temporariness to everything, whether it's just there or somebody taking it, corroding or whatever. At the same time, how about the wisdom of storing up treasures in heaven? Is that applicable for today's time? Always, because, the things on this earth are going to change over time, but the treasures in heaven do not ever change. And so what would be valuable to... he's trying to be quiet. Yeah, you're doing a good job. There you go. So the treasures in heaven, back in Jesus' day, really are not going to be the same kind of treasures that we have today, right? I mean, I don't know what kind of treasures somebody would have back then, whether it was a clay pot or a tool that would do something. But at the same time, if somebody gave me that today, it would just be like, okay, great, Well, right.
And you lay up treasure in heaven.
Right. And not only that, but the treasures in heaven are the same. And so the treasures that the disciples were promised 2,000 years ago are the same treasures that we are promised today. Right? And so, there is wisdom there of saying we need to value these spiritual things much more than we do the material things. Okay? All right, take a look at verse number 21. Is it true that our attention, well, here's the question right there. Take a look at verse number 21. Is it true that our attention, focus, desires, etc., will be what we treasure? What are things in this world that people often treasure apart from God? So what is that? In verse number 21, Jesus says, for where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. And so, the question is, whatever captures our attention, that's going to be our treasure. So what are things in this world that people today oftentimes treasure?
Homes or at home or like some of these people got these old classic cars.
Okay.
Money.
Okay. Just money? Okay. Money, the ultimate gift basket. All right, so taking a look at homes, for example. Why do people treasure homes?
Place of comfort.
Okay, it's a place of comfort. And so it's not just a material thing, it's something that the material thing can provide for us.
Status symbol.
What's that?
A status symbol.
Okay, a status symbol, and so it's not just a material thing, it is what provides as far as look where I live, look at the status. You mentioned old cars. Why would somebody want an old car?
They fix it up.
Okay, why would somebody want an old car fixed up?
To say, look at this old car that I have.
Look at this old car.
I can say to reminisce. Think back on your memories back when you were that age and drove that 55 Chevrolet before my time.
Yeah, the sense of nostalgia.
Yes, before you.
Yeah. I had a great uncle that had a Model T. And he, when I was a teenager, he drove us around it a little bit. And it was really neat, just had that sense of nostalgia. And so, for some people, that's it. That's not, I think that there's some people who like to have the old cars fixed up like the old muscle cars because it's cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so that goes back to, Chloe, your sense of status and everything.
My brother-in-law had a Roadrunner.
Really?
So you were saying you would drive a Model T?
No, I'm not.
Isn't that one cylinder or is it two?
It wasn't many. No, I would not drive a Model T, period. So, I don't think so. As a matter of fact, my grandpa used to have a story. They lived in Central Texas, and in fact, driving down I-20, just east of Abilene, there is a very long hill, one of the few in Texas. They drove up it backwards in reverse because they could get more torque in the reverse gear than they could in the other. Yeah. Yep. So when they were going up that hill, there's, I guess sometimes, or maybe all the times, they had to go up that hill in reverse to get up it. So, well, anyway, I guess that has nothing to do with anything.
In a time where nobody knew anything about what a transmission was, figuring out that your car could do the hill in reverse and not forward.
It's kind of ironic, isn't it?
Well, people knew, like the engineers, people who made it, and they probably in their much, much simpler two-page manual would have information like that. There's no AC radio, things like that. What kind of information would you put? They have documents for.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, in your owner's manual probably taught you what a gas pedal was.
I didn't think about it.
Taught you where to put your crank so that you could start it.
Yeah. Boy, we have really gotten off track here. Okay. So back to this. You can see that, there are things that we treasure, right? And what we treasure, that's really where our heart is going to gravitate towards. Okay? And so those are some things that happen as far as people apart from God. But, of all of those things, how lasting is that gain or that benefit that's there? It's temporary. You have comfort from home, but then after a while, your home starts to go down and you lose the comfort. You get used to it, and you need to remodel to get it back, and so on and so forth. So there's always those kinds of things. Okay. All right. Anybody else got any other point to these couple of verses that we're looking at? Okay. Let's go on down. Now, verse number 22. Now, in verse number 22, a little explanation is needed. People in Jesus' day thought that what you looked at affected what you would do with your body. The eye was its lamp. From the light the eye displayed internally, the body would then act accordingly. So, looking at verse number 22, Jesus said this. He said, the eye is the lamp of the body. Now, what he meant by that is a little bit different than the way that we see things, okay? So I'm going to try to draw, good luck with this, a gingerbread man figure here, kind of doing an okay job. There. All right. Not the worst, not the best, but certainly not the worst, right? Okay. So, now, let me see. If I do this, it's probably going to go all the way. So, I won't do that. I'll just try to. Oh, wouldn't you know it? Here I am trying to draw my illustration, and the whole thing just kind of locks up on me. Okay. So, look at it this way. Maybe this is going to recover here in just a second. Maybe it's not. But what we think of is when we say that the eye is the lamp of the body, we're thinking, here's the eye, okay? If I could draw here, this is what I would be drawing. Here's the eye, and we think outwardly. Our eye sees outward. And so it's like we're thinking that the light is going this direction. The eye is the lamp of the body. So from the eye, light is going out to where we can see things. That's the way that we think about it. But that's not exactly what Jesus meant from it. Oh, there we go. Okay. So, all right. So here is the eye. He's got blue eyes. And, we're thinking it's this direction. Okay? What Jesus was really saying is when you go back and you take a look at verse number 22, he said, where is 22? He says, the eye is the lamp of the body. So then if your eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your body will be full of darkness. And so he's not talking about something that is going out. He is actually talking about something that is going in. And where did my guy go? And I'm locked up again. Okay, so now he's back. Amazing. Okay. Oh, I. All right, so what we're talking about here is light that is actually coming inside the body, not going outside the body, but coming in. Okay? And so we say, well, wait a minute, I don't understand that. Well, that's just the way that they thought. They thought that the eye was the lamp and that from your eye, things would be internally projected. Okay? And so he's saying in verse number 22 that since the eye is the lamp of the body, if your eye is going to be clear, then your body is going to be full of light. Okay? But if your eye is not going to be clear, then what happens is your body is going to be full of darkness. And so it's almost like a window. All right? And that window is like internally. And so if that window is clear, then it's going to let the light in to your body. If the window is clouded over, then the light is not going to be coming into your body. And instead, it's going to be full of darkness. Okay? Does everybody understand that? Does that make sense? Okay? It's a different way of looking at it. It took me a while to figure it out. Because, I would read it, and I would read what other people said, how they thought about it, and I'm like, huh? Because, we think of about it being outward, but it's internal. Okay?
Biologically, that's how your eyeball works.
And biologically, you're correct. That is exactly how your eyeball works. Now, going back to our question, and that is, from that line of reasoning, if the light from the eye is clear, okay, and what that means is it's wholesome, it's singularly focused, and it's sincere. That's all different ways that you can translate that word. If your eye is clear, then what kind of direction does the body have? If your eye is clear, what kind of direction would the body have? What's that?
What God wants you to do.
Okay, what God wants you to do. Okay, Carol, did you have something?
I was just saying wholesome, whatever the light is.
Well, that light's going to come, and so therefore, whatever direction wholesome light is going to take you, that's the direction that you're going to go, right? And so if, for example, you are looking at wholesome things, then therefore that is going to be the internal mechanisms within your body. If you're doing something that is sincere, then, that's going to be the same thing. All right? Okay? Something that's wholesome is going to be, therefore it's going to lead you to being wholesome. At the same time, continuing on with that, can you think of some ways that would apply that to our lives? So let's just put that idea in our life today. What kind of applications could we make? What are some wholesome, sincere, clear things that we could be looking at today, so to speak? Okay. Okay, being in the Word. You know, the Lord. Right? You know, Paul said in Philippians chapter 4, and I believe it was in verse number 10, that whatever's good, whatever's noble, whatever's honest, whatever's true, whatever's trustworthy, to think about these things, and the things that you have seen and heard in me put into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. And so there's that idea about, you know, what we focus on is going to have, in turn, effect of what we do with our bodies. And if we start to focus on things that are good, then what in turn is that our outlook and what we're going to be doing with our body is going to be good, right? Okay. At the same time, we go on to say that Jesus, in the next question, Jesus went on to give the reverse of that. What if the light from the eye was bad? That is, it is clouded over with evil. What kind of direction would the body have then? Towards bad things, you know? And, you know, here we're talking earlier about how the big problem that our society has today is that we just have unchecked evil in society. And you wonder, why do we have such unchecked evil? It's because that's what people are focusing on, right? You know, it amazes me that, I mean, you know, the internet's a great thing, but with the internet, there is all kinds of stuff that's out there, you know, both good and bad. And especially for our kids, I mean, they're exposed to some very, very dark, evil things out there, whether that is pornography, whether it is violence, whether it is, you know, just all kinds of bad. Hi, how are you? You got a cookie, don't you? Okay. And there he goes. All right. And so, you know, it's any wonder, oh, she's going to get you. She's got you. You know, from all that dark, it's any wonder that, you know, the kids just have an outlook of darkness because it's what they're focused on. And it's not just simply the kids either. It's the adults too. It's everybody. It is very prevalent out there. And so because there's so much darkness, then that's what you can see is that the life direction of people's bodies, what they're doing with their life, is going that way. And it is so basic and so much common sense, but it's so lost on us. And I think it's because of how much darkness it is. What Jesus says here is this. You know, he says in verse 23, but if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. So if the light that is in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? You know, if that's what people are focused on and looking at for guidance and direction, they're not going to find any guidance and direction in terms of the bigger things and spiritual things about God, because they're just going to be lost. Okay, anybody have any questions or comments about that?
Saying like garbage in, garbage out. That's what that reminds me of when you talk about
it is.
Yeah.
It's a different way of looking at it, but it's the same idea. You know, the idea about garbage in, garbage out is just simply, you know, bad things. As you put bad things in, you get bad things out. There's not the converse of that, which is, you know, good in, good out. So, all right. So what do you think? How big of a role does materialism play with the focus that people's lives take? You know, here we are talking about this idea about light and darkness and everything like that. But does materialism play any kind of role in that? Let me ask you a question. Materialism. For who is it? What is it for? What is the main idea behind all of it? You know, if somebody is, if I'm materialistic, why am I being materialistic? There you, oh, thank you. Because I was about to say, what's in it for me? But then that pretty much is it, right? You know, we are materialistic because we want something for ourselves. Okay? And so once we have that focus so much on ourselves, don't you see how that is that darkness? There's that cloudiness. There's that evil because the focus is here now. The focus is not on God. The focus is not on God's kingdom. The focus is not on loving our brothers as ourselves, our neighbors as ourselves. It's all about us. Okay. In verse number 24, Jesus said that no man can serve two masters. So taking a look at verse number 24. No one can serve two masters. He will either hate the one, love the other. He will be devoted to the one and despise the other. Who are the two masters? Yep, that's easy, right? Money and God, or God, and what's translated here is wealth. All right? Okay. Moving on down to the next question after that, in verse 24, it says wealth in verse number 24 is commonly translated as mammon. Have you ever heard that? You can't serve both God and mammon. Okay. Maybe you've heard that, maybe you've not heard of that. That is the more traditional translation. What is mammon? You know, every time I hear that, I think of a great woolly mammon, but that's not what mammon is. Mammon is really just a transliteration of the Greek word mammon, which is money or wealth. And so that's why it's translated money, wealth, riches, so on and so forth. It is oftentimes capitalized, meaning that it is personified. And I do think Jesus was trying to personify riches, or he is trying to personify wealth by saying, you know, you've got these two different masters. You've got God on the one hand, and then you've got riches, and you've got wealth on the other thing, okay? So here we have mammon being personified. So if mammon is being personified, what traits are being portrayed, and is it possible that money can take on a greater power in our lives than just being a commodity? So what do you think? What kind of traits does mammon have in this verse, in verse number 24?
Powerful, it's like gives them power because they've got these things.
Okay, so one trait of mammon is power, right? Okay. So that is something that people think about money, what it will do for them. But do you see that there is a certain kind of power within the mammon itself? It's got a hold of them, right? Greediness that's there. And so what we see here is that, you know, it says two masters. Okay, and so, you know, you've got this master, and this master of mammon is going to be having power over somebody. What else would a master have? What does a master demand?
The master would have control over you.
Okay. But what does a master demand? Submission or obedience. Okay. So when you think about this, do you see that maybe money can take on a power that we really don't quite oftentimes see? It should just simply be a commodity. Should just simply be there, but quite oftentimes what we see with money is that it almost starts to take over and have kind of a life of its own, so to speak. Why do people do some of the most outrageous, most despicable, most desperate, most everything? It's because of this obedience to money. It's like, money has this control over them. Materialism has this control over them because they're constantly wanting this next high. They're constantly wanting this next glorification of themselves, this next rush of themselves, this next whatever. And so, as soon as that starts to fade off, then they've got to replenish it, right? And as soon as it starts to fade off, you got to replenish it. And so that's where the power of money comes in. And that's where it gets you. And because it just pretty much, it's got complete control over your life, and you have your whole obedience to it, You are, working two jobs in order to not just simply, make it. You're working two jobs in order to supply your fix on materialism, so to speak. Okay?
I don't know where this fits in, but I feel like it's not always seeking the high of something new and something, just getting higher and higher, but it's avoiding the fear of being low.
Okay, yeah, absolutely.
So, it's not I think of just the, the money grubbers, that they save and save and save, and they're constantly chasing to save and save and save and save and save. And so, they work two jobs, and so they're not putting their faith in God to get them through whatever, with whatever they have, but they're, trying to make it on their own and work.
Yes, absolutely. And they're always thinking, oh, well, I'm going to get to a point when, but, I really wonder where that point is, at what point is, enough money. So, okay, so Jesus said in verse 24 that no one can serve these two masters. He's either going to hate one and love the other, and we oftentimes use the word hate and love in terms of emotion, but what they viewed it as in terms of hate and love is dedication. And so, if you're going to be dedicated to one person, you're going to love, but in being dedicated to one, what you're going to do is you're going to be hating the other, and then something that's going to be the same, that is, you're going to be devoted to one, but then you're going to be despising the other. And so here Jesus said you can't do this. You can't just serve God and mammon. So the question is, why not? Why can't people serve God and mammon at the same time?
God in anything, can you?
It's true.
More than just God, because then you're too wide to do an idol worship, I guess.
There's that key word there, and that is idol. All right? In the New Testament, do you know what gets paired with idolatry? Greediness, covetousness. And we say, well, why would covetousness or greediness be paired with idolatry? Well, it's because of this right here. Greediness is the willing to start to almost worship money. And when you worship money, you can't worship God. It doesn't work out that way. The two are not compatible. The two are exclusive to one another, because at the root of that greediness is going to be self and a love of self. You know, at the same time, if you're going to worship God, there's got to be a love of God there, and there's got to be a refusal of self, a rejection of self. And so you got two things that are in just stark contrast with one another.
I think a prime example is reading about that. This widow woman, she gave in everything she had.
Yes.
To God. That proves she didn't allow wealth to become her God.
Yep. I think you're right. You know, and when we put God over money, then people would say, well, we're losing out, but are we really? I don't think so. Okay. So the last question is, with these three contrasting illustrations, do you see any common threads in between them? And it's pretty obvious. It's money, it's materialism, right? Because with the two masters, we've got God and money. That's obvious. In the very first one, treasures on earth, treasures in heaven. And so there's their idea about materialism and money. And then when we look at the middle one of the light and the darkness, you know, we can see that when you pair the two together, you know, we can look at materialism being more of simply than a thing. It's a guiding principle that really leads us into darkness. When we look on page number 14, it says, from what Jesus told his disciples, we need to be sure to be devoted to God from the heart and not be devoted to money. One gives everything, the other takes everything. One is gracious and merciful, the other is just cold and hard. Cold, hard cash. And that's exactly what it is. You know, but when you think about it, money really is a very cold, harsh taskmaster that's always going to be demanding more and more and more. Okay, so of these three contrasting illustrations, that is treasures, life direction, and masters, was there one that stood out to you the most, and why was that?
I wrote down life direction.
Life direction?
Following God and His direction. All else will take care of itself.
Okay. I mean, there may be some that you know, all three of them stood out to you. You know, one, it may be, oh yeah. For me, you know, all three of them do stand out for me from time to time, but I always just come back to verse number 24 of just, you cannot serve God and mammon. You're going to love one, you're going to hate the other. You're going to be devoted to one, you're going to cling to despise the other. You can't do it. The world would say love money and use people. Do you think the world, you know, when you kind of sum up the world's philosophies about things, you think that that's pretty much what it sums up to? Love money and use people?
People will do that.
They will, yeah. So how can we rephrase this to better match being Jesus' disciples?
Love people and use money.
Love people and use money. Okay. So here's the question. Of the two sayings of loving money and using people, or using money and loving people, which do we find ourselves kind of falling into more? You know, at times there may be a little bit of a mixed bag, right? Because as we talked about before, we should be devoted to God 24/7, but under in this life, you know, it's not going to be that way. In heaven it will be, but now we just need to kind of make that conscious effort and bring it to our attention of saying, okay, what's more important? So what are some things in life that pull you away from your devotion to God? After looking at this passage of Scripture, are there some adjustments that you can make to kind of increase it? You know, as for me, I'm thinking as far as the lamp is the eye of the body, and I'm reminded, hey, you know what? I need to be, you know, focusing more on the things of God. You know, I'm not saying that I you know, completely ignore them, but I do think about them, but I need to do it more. and maybe I need to do the other things of the world less. And I'm not saying that, watching TV is bad or anything like that. It's just that, as far as what really gets our attention, what really, draws our heart to something, it needs to be that. At least for me anyway. Somebody else have something?
Same thing. I think that eye thing I thought was really a good one to think about.
Yeah.
Like you said, the light in and the darkness in.
All right. Okay, anybody got any questions before we leave off tonight?